The forest roared with winter's fury. Snow blasted through the trees in furious spirals as Kara Langley trudged the trail alone, her boots sinking into the powder with every step. Her breath came in short, visible bursts, each one quickly stolen by the wind. Below her, the Columbia River churned like a beast, whitecaps foaming over jagged ice-lined rocks. It had risen fast in the last few hours, too fast. Kara lifted her camera, clicking through the viewfinder with numb fingers, capturing the raw violence of the current. Far off, almost lost in the wind, she caught the faint pulse of siren search teams again. Maybe. She paused. Something about the sound made her stomach tighten. Her camera locked onto a cluster of pine trees, sagging under snow, frozen mid-collapse. Kara adjusted the focus, snapping again. To anyone else, it was just nature. But for her, it was the only thing that didn't expect her to smile or explain or be okay. She lowered the lens slowly, eyes drifting toward the blur of mountains beyond the trees. The landscape was breathtaking, cold, beautiful, and yet, inside her chest, everything churned, no matter how far she hiked. She couldn't outrun the silence that followed her. She used to be somebody. That's what people whispered when they saw her photos in magazines. But the woman behind those pictures didn't exist anymore. Not since the divorce. Not since the betrayal. Not since she'd packed her things and driven until the signal bars disappeared from her phone. Now, she lived in a cabin barely tethered to civilization, half-chosen exile, half-silent scream. Wildlife assignments were the only thing keeping her moving, and the forest didn't ask questions. Kara stood at the overlook, gazing down at the river thrashing below. The snow was falling harder now, but she barely noticed. She didn't feel the cold. Not really. Not compared to what she'd been carrying for the past year. There was something comforting about the river's chaos, like it understood her better than anyone else had. Wild, unpredictable, dangerous, beautiful, the same words people used to describe her. ONCEA, crack of ice snapped nearby. She didn't flinch. She didn't feel anything anymore. Then it came, a bark sharp, panicked, too close. Not the drawn-out cry of a coyote or the echo of a wolf. This one had urgency, purpose. Kara jerked her head toward the trees, heart suddenly thrumming. Another bark followed, then a low, rapid series of growls. She reached for her camera, adjusting the zoom toward the sound. But the trees were too dense. No sign of anything, yet the hairs on the back of her neck rose. This wasn't just wildlife noise. It was a signal, a cry. Something or someone was in trouble. She didn't hesitate. She dropped her tripod into the snow, slung her camera bag over her shoulder, and took off through the trees. Branches whipped at her face as she pushed forward, driven by instinct alone. Every step toward the sound stirred something old and buried. Inside her, a flicker of something she hadn't felt in months. Fear, yes, but also ... a strange pull, like the forest itself was calling her, like she was meant to hear that bark. She didn't know what she'd find, but for the first time in a long time, she had to know. The barking stopped. Kara froze, the stillness around her suddenly unbearable. Her breath caught in her throat. No more wind, no more cries, just the pounding of her heart, loud, erratic, full of something she hadn't recognized in a while. Urgency and maybe ... hope. She pressed forward, more careful now, senses flaring. Whatever was ahead, it wasn't just a sound anymore. It was a turning point, Snow crunched beneath her boots as she moved through the last thicket of trees. The forest opened slightly ahead, revealing a slope down to the cliff's edge. She didn't know what waited for her at the end of that trail, but somehow she knew it wouldn't be a photo. It would be a beginning. The sound pulled her like a thread. Kara broke through a thicket of frosted branches, nearly losing her footing on the snow-slick slope. Her boots slid on loose ice as she skidded to a halt, then froze. A large German shepherd stood near the cliff's edge, pacing with sharp, anxious movements. His barking cut through the storm like flares in the dark, desperate, relentless. He wasn't barking at Kara. He was barking down. Kara crept closer, breath clouding the air, eyes narrowing. The dog's fur was soaked, legs trembling, but he didn't look back at her. His focus stayed locked on the river below, where the current writhed like a snake beneath the cliff's ledge. "What are you doing?" she whispered, voice swallowed by wind. The dog barked again, dash louder. Then he leaped. Kara's gasp died in her throat as the shepherd disappeared beneath the churning white water. "No, no, no," she breathed, rushing to the edge and scanning the torrent. Foam and spray lashed upward. The river was too wild. He wouldn't make it, but this wasn't a random act of instinct. The dog hadn't jumped in fear or panic. He had leaped with purpose. She dropped to her knees, scanning frantically. Her heart pounded in her ears as seconds stretched. Nothing, no sign. Only the river, roaring dot, and then movement. A shadowed shape broke the surface several yards downstream. Fighting against the current dot, the dog was swimming. But he wasn't alone. Kara fumbled for the binoculars hanging around her neck. Her fingers, stiff with cold, barely managed to focus the lens. Her breath hitched. A small figure half submerged, wrapped in the dog's grip, floated in the waves. A child, a little boy, motionless in the shepherd's jaws, like he'd gone. Limp from exhaustion, or worse. Terror clamped down on Kara's chest. The dog powered forward, paddling with every ounce of strength. The boy's arm dangled limply. His head bobbed under the surface before the dog lifted it again. "Oh my God," she whispered. Kara shot to her feet and took off downhill, feet sliding, lungs burning, running toward them like her life depended on it, because maybe he did. The riverbank rose into view just as the shepherd crawled out of the water, trembling, soaked, and still gripping the boy. Kara dropped beside them, her knees slamming into frozen earth. The dog set the child down gently, lowering his head protectively, as if unwilling to leave his side for even a second. Kara reached for the boy, then paused. The dog growled, low and warning. "It's okay," she said softly, hands raised. "Just want to help." The dog's eyes locked with hers, wild, wet, intelligent. For a moment, something passed between them. Then, with visible effort, he stepped back. Kara scooped the boy into her arms. He was so cold, so still. "Stay with me, kid," she whispered. "Please." Back at her makeshift shelter near the trail's fork, Kara wrapped the boy in her down coat and sat him by the fire starter. Pack she kept buried under rocks. His lips were pale blue. He wasn't speaking. He wasn't crying. But the moment shadow nudged beside him, the boy moved. He turned, sluggishly, and buried his face in the dog's wet neck, clinging to him like a lifeline. Kara saw it clearly. This wasn't a one-time rescue. This bond had history, depth. "Hey," she said gently, kneeling. "Can you tell me your name?" No answer. Just the soft, broken breath of a child holding on like the world might disappear. If he let go, Kara examined the dog, now curled tightly around the boy. His body shook slightly, but not from fear, fatigue, cold. Around his neck was a thick, reinforced collar with Velcro pouches. One was labeled Service K9, but no tag. No name, no contact info, not even a number. Service animal, but whose, and what? Was he doing out here alone with a child? She glanced back at the boy, still silent, still clinging. This wasn't a random situation. They hadn't wandered off by accident. They were running from something. Kara pulled her radio from her pack and adjusted the frequency. Nothing but static. She tried again, still nothing. The storm had knocked out the tower dash again. No help was coming. Not tonight. Not in this weather. She stared at the boy and the dog curled beside him. The wind howled outside the tiny shelter, and the cold crept closer. She could wait and risk hypothermia, or she could move. With steady hands, she packed them both into her sled cart, wrapped them in spare blankets, and headed home through the storm. She didn't know what she was doing. She just knew she couldn't leave them. Inside the warmth of her cabin, the boy sat bundled on the floor, wrapped in layers, the fire crackling beside him. The shepherd Shadow she'd started to call him watched Kara like a sentry. Every time she approached the boy, Shadow moved between them, not threatening but firm, protective. The boy didn't speak, didn't make eye contact, but when Kara brought him warm soup, he took it tonally after Shadow sniffed it first. It was like trying to step into a fortress built from trust, and Kara knew it would take time to be allowed inside, but she wasn't walking away. The cabin was quiet, save for the occasional crackle from the wood-burning stove. Outside, the storm clawed at the windows, but inside, warmth wrapped around the space like a blanket. Leo lay curled on a folded blanket, still bundled in borrowed layers. His breathing was shallow but steady. Shadow pressed against him, protective and still. The dog hadn't moved much since they arrived. His amber eyes flicked open at the smallest sound. Scanning, guarding, Gara watched from across the room, sitting at the edge of the couch with a blanket draped around her shoulders. She didn't try to approach again. Not yet. They were still strangers, 3 lives that had collided by force of fate. But as she stared at the boy's small frame nestled into the shepherd's side, she couldn't shake the feeling that this moment was something more than chance. The next morning, Kara moved slowly. She knelt beside Leo, whispering gently, her fingers hovering near his shoulder. Shadow watched, unmoving, but didn't growl this time. "I just want to get the snow out of your hair, sweetheart," she said softly. Leo didn't respond. His eyes stared at the wooden floor, hands clenched, into the sleeves of his coat. But he didn't flinch when her fingers touched his curls. She brushed them gently, careful not to move too fast. Bits of ice and pine needles tumbled out. Kara smiled, not because it was a breakthrough, but because it wasn't a rejection. Later, when she placed a mug of warm broth beside him, he reached for it, slowly, his eyes flicking up toward her for a heartbeat before dropping again. That one look hit her harder than words ever could. Each time Kara moved too close, Shadow positioned himself between them. He wasn't aggressive, he didn't bare teeth or snarl, but the message was clear. This boy was his to protect. When Kara offered Leo a second blanket and reached forward to adjust it, Shadow stood. Not threatening, not loud, just a present. Like a wall that had lived through war and refused to crumble. It was days before that. Wall began to crack. It happened quietly. Kara dropped a slice of cooked venison beside the fire for Shadow. The dog eyed it, then looked at her. Not with suspicion, Just ... Pause. The next morning, Kara awoke to find him resting with his head near her feet. He hadn't let her touch the boy, but maybe, just maybe, he was starting to trust her. It happened. When she finally washed his clothes, Kara waited until Leo was bathed and tucked under layers by the fire. He hadn't protested when she swapped his wet shirt for a fresh one. Too tired or too scared to argue, that she carried his coat to the basin. A scrap of folded paper tumbled out. She unfolded it, slowly delicate, like unwrapping a memory. It was a child's drawing. A stick figure of a boy with wild hair, a big dog beside him, and a small house tucked under a scribbled sun. Taped to the back was a torn corner of a printed document. Something legal. Faded ink. Custody. The rest was unreadable. Kara sat down hard, the paper trembling in her hand. This boy wasn't just lost. He'd been taken from someone, or by someone, and the dog had brought him here. That night, Kara couldn't sleep. The firelight cast shadows on the log walls as she sat at the edge of the bed, staring into the orange glow like it might answer her questions. She should call someone, report the boy. The storm had let up. She could hike to the ranger station by morning, but every time she looked at Leo, how he slept curled under Shadow's body, how his fingers refused to let go of the dog's fur, she hesitated. What if she handed him back to someone who had hurt him? What if that dog had risked everything, not to save the boy but to escape with him? She closed her eyes, voice breaking in a whisper. What if keeping him safe means breaking the rules? And in her gut something shifted. Shadow was never still for long. He flinched at creaking floorboards, jolted at sudden noises, and barked once sharply when a log cracked too loudly in the fire. Kara noticed it all, the tremble in his muscles, when wind whistled under the door, the way he checked every window before lying down, the tension that lived beneath his fur, like he was waiting for something bad to return. It wasn't just Leo who had seen pain. It was both of them. "Hey," she said once, kneeling beside Shadow as he stood staring at the back door. "No one's coming tonight. You're safe here. Both of you." The dog blinked slowly. Did he understand? Maybe not. But he didn't move away when she placed a gentle hand on his back. And that ... was everything. The storm returned with full force the next day, closing off the trail and knocking out the power line. Kara lit oil lamps, boiled snow for water, and settled in. What should have felt like isolation felt strangely ... right. They played no games, shared no conversations, but the silence wasn't hollow. Leo sat closer to the fire now. Shadow let Kara brush the ice from his coat, and once, when Leo dozed off, Kara tucked a blanket around him. Man, Shadow didn't move. They shared meals, Skara cooked soup while Leo watched, his eyes following each movement. She left a spoon in front of him, and hours later, it was empty. They didn't need words. Trust was being spoken in warmth, in silence, in space gently given and slowly earned. It was on the third day, when the sun peeked through the window for the first time, that Kara did something unexpected. She placed her old DSLR camera on the table beside Leo and said, "You want to try?" He blinked at it, then at her, then at Shadow. The dog gave a soft huff, like approval. Leo picked it up carefully, his fingers wrapping around it like it was something precious. Kara showed him how to press the shutter. He didn't speak, but when he looked through the viewfinder and clicked the first photo of Shadow, curled up and blinking at him, his lips curved just slightly. Not a smile. Not yet, but a beginning. That night, Kara turned on her solar-powered radio. The signal was faint, crackling, until a voice cut through. Missing boy. Possible abduction. ... Last seen in the Northern Range area. Believed to be with a large German shepherd. Suspect may be armed. Kara's heart dropped. She turned to look at Leo. He was asleep beside Shadow again, their forms indistinguishable in the firelight. She didn't need more evidence. The pieces had clicked. Leo hadn't wandered, he'd fled, and someone dangerous was looking for him. Kara sat on the floor that night, knees drawn to her chest. Leo's quiet breath, Shadow's slow snores, and the ticking of the old cabin clock filled the space. Her hand hovered over the emergency beacon transmitter. She could send a signal. Authorities would come, and Leo might be taken from her hand, from Shadow. Or she could wait, protect them a little longer, until she knew what the right thing really was. She looked at them again, two souls stitched together by something deeper than survival. Kara whispered to the dark, to the storm beyond the windows. I don't know what the law says, but I know what love looks like. And with that, she left the beacon untouched. The knock hit the door like a gunshot. Kara jerked her head up from the table, where she'd been helping Leo draw a new sketch. The pencil snapped in her hand. Before she could speak, Shadow was already on his feet, hackles raised, a low snarl rumbling in his throat. His body slid between Leo and the door like a reflex, his stare locked on the handle that had just rattled once. Then again, stay here, Kara whispered to Leo. Rising slowly, through the frosted window, a shadow loomed. The man who stood on her porch looked calm, normal, but Shadow's growl deepened the moment Kara opened the door a crack. Hi, the man said. I think my son might be in there. The man's smile was thin, practiced. His breath fogged the air as he looked over Kara's shoulder. I've been searching for my boy for days, he said. I heard a woman up this trail might seen something. His tone tried to mimic worry, but it didn't land. Something felt rehearsed. Do you have ID? Kara asked, her voice steady. The man's smile faltered for the briefest moment. I lost my wallet. Look, he's probably scared. If I could just come in and talk to him. Shadow growled again, louder this time. Leo whimpered behind. The doorframe. Kara tightened her grip on the door handle. I think you should stay right there, she said, her pulse beginning to race. Kara stepped back inside, just enough to block the man's view. Shadow was already in place, his body stiff, tail low, ears pinned. He wasn't just guarding, he was ready. Leo had frozen behind the wood stove, his arms clutched tight around his knees. He didn't speak, but his shaking said everything. No one's going to take you, Kara said gently, her eyes never leaving. Shadow. The man knocked again, louder, impatient now. You're making a mistake. He barked through the door. Shadow bared his teeth, his snarl sharp enough to silence the room. Kara's voice dropped to a whisper. Do what you have to do, boy. I'll do the rest. Her hands trembled as she activated the drone's GPS. She had installed the tiny camera weeks ago for nature shots. Now it was her lifeline. While Shadow kept guard, Kara opened the back window a crack and sent the drone into the storm. It buzzed into the sky, its light blinking like a promise. She tapped the record button on her phone, setting it quietly on the table near the door. Everything the man said, every movement captured. He paced the porch, now agitated. You don't understand who you're dealing with, he called out. That dog is dangerous. The kid's traumatized. I'm the only one who can help him. Kara met Shadow's eyes. Not anymore, she whispered. It happened fast. The man slammed the door open without warning. Wood cracked. Hinges screamed. Leo screamed Toro, terrified. Shadow moved like lightning, launching at the intruder with a snarl that shook the walls. His teeth clamped onto the man's arm, dragging him down before he could reach the boy. Get him off, the man howled, twisting violently. Kara grabbed Leo and pulled him into the kitchen corner, shielding his body with hers. The radio slid from the counter and shattered. Shadow held his ground, despite kicks, fists, and flailing elbows. His body shuddered under the assault, but he didn't let go until the man landed a blow across his ribs with the broken door. Shadow yelped, but even then he didn't retreat. He stood back, upwounded, bleeding still in front of Leo. Shadow's side bled where the wood had cut deep, his breath ragged, his legs trembling. But he did not move. He stepped in front of Leo once again, head low, eyes locked on the intruder. Kara scrambled to grab the fireplace poker, raising it between them and the man. Don't take another step, she warned, voice shaking. The man hesitated. He looked between Kara and the snarling dog, calculating, but it was already too late, outside. The sound of tires crunching through snow broke the silence. Shadow gave a final growl and staggered back, collapsing just enough to make Kara's chest clench. Hold on, she whispered to him. Help's coming. Flashing lights painted the windows seconds later. Red, blue, salvation. The front door burst open again, this time not with violence but with rescue. 2 officers charged in, weapons drawn. Get on the ground, hands where we can see them. The man froze, rage twisting his face as they forced him down. One officer gently moved toward Kara, who still had her arms wrapped around Leo. The other officer knelt beside Shadow. This is your dog, Kara's voice cracked. He's ours. Later, in the back of the patrol car, the truth spilled out. He wasn't Leo's biological father. He was the abusive stepfather who'd violated a court order and vanished with the boy weeks earlier. Shadow had been trained by Leo's real dad to protect the boy. When the situation turned violent, the dog had made the decision Kara would later struggle with, escape, and somehow they'd found her, in the cabin again, warmth slowly returning. Kara cradled Shadow's bandaged body as he lay beside Leo. The boy hadn't let go of him since the officers left. He pressed his head into the shepherd's chest, whispering something only Shadow could hear. Kara wept finally, freely, her arms wrapped around both. Of them, they weren't just a child and a dog. They were survivors, and they had chosen her as night settled over the cabin. Kara sat by the fire with Leo asleep in her lap and Shadow resting at her feet. She brushed the boy's hair back gently, her heart aching and full. Then Dash, barely above a breath, he whispered, Kara. She stilled his first word, not just a sound, not a command, a name. Her name. Kara's eyes welled again as she cupped his cheek, voice trembling. I've got you, Leo. I've got both of you. And this time, it wasn't just a promise, it was a vow. The envelope felt heavier than it should have. Kara sat at the kitchen table, fingers trembling slightly as she unfolded the letter. Her eyes skimmed the printed words, catching the one that mattered most. Temporary guardianship. Granted, she exhaled. Slow and deep, her heart no longer racing but firm. Anchored. Leo was safe. here with her Dot and Shadow, now officially registered as Leo's emotional support dog, lay curled at the boy's feet, a quiet sentinel who had earned his title through love, not training. They weren't just guests anymore, not temporary, not visitors on borrowed time. They were hers, and she was theirs. Mornings had changed. Where once the only sounds had been the crackle of firewood and the distant call of crows, now the cabin hummed with life. Leo giggled softly as he poured cereal into his bowl, spilling some on the counter. Kara smiled and handed him a towel, no words needed. Shadow rested beside the table, eyes half-lidded, tail thumping once as Leo dropped a single piece for him on purpose. The boy spoke in sentences. Now, quiet ones, careful ones, but words nonetheless. He called Kara by name with ease. He told Shadow stories no one else could hear. Kara cooked breakfast while music played softly from the radio. The loneliness that had once haunted her chest was now a stranger. She didn't miss it. The snow had melted, revealing the path that had once nearly taken a life and saved 3 more. Kara walked the trail with Leo's mittened hand in hers and Shadow trotting ahead, ears alert but relaxed. No fear in his gait, no tension in his shoulders, just joy. They stopped at the bend overlooking the river, the same one where the current had once tried to steal a child. Now the sun shimmered on the water. Leo knelt beside a patch of soft moss, holding Kara's camera with practiced hands. Shadow sat beside him, posing like he knew he was part of something sacred. A moment, a memory, a new story written in peace, not pain. They stood in silence, Kara's arm around Leo's shoulder, Shadow pressed gently against their legs. The river whispered, no soft, steady, no longer wild. It hadn't changed, but they had. Kara looked down at the boy she hadn't known weeks ago, at the dog who had chosen trust over instinct, and at the person she had become. I used to come here to feel nothing, she said softly. Leo glanced up at her, his brow raised in question. But now, she smiled. I come here to feel everything. The wind stirred gently, lifting Leo's curls. Shadow gave a low, contented sound. They didn't need to run anymore. They had found home together. Kara used to think she'd found Leo and Shadow. By accident, like she'd stumbled into someone else's story. But now, as she watched them napping together on the porch, Leo's small hand resting gently on Shadow's back, she saw it for what it truly was. They had rescued her from silence, from isolation, from the weight of grief she hadn't even known she was carrying. She had opened her door to a storm-torn stranger, but it was that stranger too, actually, who reminded her how to feel again. Not with grand gestures, but with presence, with trust, with love that asked for nothing, but gave everything. Shadow never barked for attention. He didn't chase applause. He had faced down a monster not because he had to, but because he couldn't imagine doing anything less. Now he rested quietly near the fire, tail gently thumping each time Leo whispered his name in his sleep. To the world, he was just a dog, but to Kara, he was the truest kind of brave, the kind that stood its ground, held its place, and chose to love without condition, and he had never once walked away. There were still scars. Leo still flinched sometimes. In his dreams, Shadow still watched the door a little too long after sunset. Kara still felt echoes of her old life in quiet moments, but those scars weren't cracks anymore. They were the places where the light got in, together. They weren't defined by what they'd lost. They were defined by what they'd chosen to move forward, and they would carry each other there, one steady step at a time.